I never thought a simple trip to my lake cabin would turn into such a wild nightmare. It all started on a quiet afternoon when I was unloading firewood, just trying to get everything ready for the chilly evenings ahead. The air was fresh, the sun was setting, and I was finally feeling that peaceful cabin vibe I'd been craving. But then, out of nowhere, things took a strange turn. The neighborhood HOA Karen showed up, eyes blazing with anger, and claimed the firewood I was unloading wasn't mine at all. According to her, that timber belonged to her. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. How could someone just show up and say something like that, especially when this was my property? We've all heard stories about HOA drama before, but I never imagined it would hit so close to home, literally. What started as a peaceful day ended with accusations, confusion, and an unexpected call to the cops. Yes, she actually called the police while I was just minding my own business, unloading warm. This story isn't just about a dispute over some logs. It's about how far people will go when they feel entitled, how small conflicts can spiral out of control, and how property lines and HOA rules sometimes blur into a messy battlefield. You'll meet the characters involved, the determined homeowner, the overzealous HOA Karen, and the officers caught in the middle. But what really happened that day? Was the firewood really hers? And what did the police say when they arrived? I'll share all the details in the next part, but for now, imagine standing there with your hard work being questioned, and someone else claiming your things as theirs. It's a story about ownership, rights, and the unexpected battles that come with living in a community. Stick around, because this one gets even crazier. The whole situation felt surreal. Let me back up a little and explain how this all started. I've owned this lake cabin for a few years now, and it's always been my little escape from the chaos of daily life. Over time, I built a good routine stocking up on firewood, keeping the place tidy and enjoying the quiet nature around me. The cabin sits on a piece of land that's part of a community governed by an HOA, but I never had any real issues with them before. Sure, there were the usual reminders about lawn care or small rules about what kind of decorations you can have, but nothing serious. The firewood I was unloading that day came from a nearby lot where I had permission to gather fallen timber. I made sure everything was legal and properly documented, and I always kept records in case there were questions. So when the HOA Karen suddenly appeared, pointing fingers and accusing me of stealing timber, it caught me completely off guard. She was loud, insisting this was her wood and that I had no right to be handling it. I tried to stay calm, explaining the situation, but she wasn't having any of it. Before I knew it, she was on her phone, calling the cops and insisting they come out immediately. I had never dealt with anything like this before, being accused right on my property and having the police called on me. The tension between us was thick. Neighbors started gathering, and the quiet lake day turned into a standoff. What made it even stranger was that I later found out this woman had a history of conflict with other neighbors over property lines and community rules. It seemed like she was always looking for a fight. But why pick this fight with me over firewood? And was there something more behind her aggressive behavior? The police were on their way, and I wasn't sure what to expect next. Would they side with her or listen to my side? The whole thing felt like it was about to explode, and I was right in the middle of it as the minutes ticked by. I could feel the tension building not just between me and the HOA Karen, but across the whole neighborhood. Some of the neighbors came over quietly, curious but unsure what to make of the situation. I could see a few giving me sympathetic looks, while others seemed nervous, probably worried about stirring up trouble with the HOA. This wasn't just about firewood. Anymore, it felt like a clash between individual rights and the strict, sometimes overbearing control the HOA tried to exert over the community. The HOA Karen wasn't just loud, she was relentless. She started bringing up old grievances, claiming that I'd been ignoring community rules and disrespecting the shared spaces. I knew some of those accusations weren't true, but I also didn't want to get pulled into a long fight over petty issues. Still, it was clear she was using this Firewood incident as a way to assert her power. Maybe even to scare me off the property. On the other hand, I couldn't help but wonder if there was some misunderstanding about the timber. Could it be that the property lines around the lake cabin were murkier than I thought? I decided to dig into the property maps and talk to the land office after this. But at that moment, with the HOA Karen accusing me in front of the neighbors and the police about to arrive, I had to focus on the here and now. What made things more complicated was that I found out the HOA board was divided on this woman's approach. Some members thought she was going too far, stirring unnecessary trouble that hurt the community's peace. Others backed her completely, which meant the HOA politics were messier than I imagined. It felt like I was caught in the middle of an ongoing power struggle that went way beyond a pile of firewood. The arrival of the cops only added to the tension. I was left wondering, would they see this as a simple property dispute or something more? The questions kept swirling in my head, and the story was far from over. When the police finally pulled up, the air felt thick with anticipation. Everyone seemed to hold their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The HOA Karen immediately stepped forward, her voice sharp as she repeated her claim that the firewood was hers, that I was trespassing and stealing from the community's timber resources. I stood my ground, trying to explain calmly that I had permission and proof. But with the growing crowd and the tension already boiling over, it was hard to be heard. The officers started asking questions, looking between me and the HOA Karen, trying to figure out what was really going on. I could see them glancing at the firewood pile, then back at the papers I handed over showing my permits. But it wasn't just about legality anymore. The whole neighborhood was watching, and the tension was at a breaking point. Some neighbors whispered that this wasn't the first time the HOA Karen had pulled this kind of stunt, but others looked unsure, maybe worried about which side to take. Then came the moment I didn't expect. The HOA Karen insisted that the firewood had been marked as community property and that I had no right to claim it as mine. This threw a new layer of confusion into the mix. I knew the property lines were supposed to be clear, but now it felt like a twisted game of he said, she said, and I was stuck in the middle, fighting not just for the firewood, but for my own rights. As the police discussed quietly among themselves, the crowd grew restless. Some neighbors started voicing their opinions, making the scene louder and more chaotic. The HOA Karen's aggressive stance made it clear she wasn't backing down, and I realized this wasn't just about firewood anymore. This was about control, respect, and who really owned the space we all shared. Just when I thought things couldn't get more intense, one of the officers made a move that stunned everyone, but I'm getting ahead of myself. What happened next changed everything. And I couldn't believe how quickly this quiet lake cabin day spiraled into something I never saw coming. Just when I thought the situation couldn't get any more intense, the officer surprised everyone by asking the HOA Karen if she had any paperwork to back up her claim. She hesitated, then fumbled through a stack of papers, finally pulling out a faded, barely legible document that she insisted proved the firewood belonged to the community, and by extension, to her as a board member of the HOA. The twist was shocking because I had never seen this document before, and no one else in the neighborhood seemed to know about it either. That's when whispers started spreading through the crowd. Some neighbors said the HOA had been hiding certain rules and agreements that weren't widely shared, creating confusion and conflict behind the scenes. Others wondered if this was just another power play by the HOA Karen, using obscure paperwork to intimidate people and assert control over properties that weren't really hers to claim. I felt a surge of frustration and disbelief. Here I was, simply trying to enjoy my own cabin and keep it warm with some firewood. But now, I was tangled in a deeper conflict about property rights, hidden HOA agreements, and community politics. The officer carefully examined the document, but didn't make any immediate decisions, only saying that this added a whole new layer to the dispute. The HOA Karen grew bolder, almost triumphant, as if she thought victory was within reach. Meanwhile, I could see some neighbors shifting uncomfortably, unsure who to trust or what side to take. The sense of community I'd cherished felt like it was slipping away, replaced by suspicion and tension as the police prepared to step back and leave the situation unresolved for now. I realized this wasn't going to be a simple fix. The stakes had just gone up, and I was at the center of a conflict that seemed bigger than just firewood. It was about ownership, power, and who really had the right to decide what belonged where. The lake cabin that was supposed to be my refuge suddenly felt like a battlefield, and the story was far from over. The tension reached its peak as the officers took a closer look at the faded document the HOA Karen had produced. After some back-and-forth questioning, it became clear that the paper was, at best, outdated and ambiguous. The property lines it reference didn't match current records, and crucial details were missing. One officer quietly pulled out his phone and called the local land office to verify the claims right there on the spot. The whole crowd waited, silent and expectant. Minutes later, the call ended, and the officer shared what he had learned. The firewood was, in fact, on my property. The timber I had gathered was legally mine to use, and there was no evidence that the HOA had any claim over it. The HOA Karen's document was an old draft that never passed through official channels. Relief flooded me. But the HOA Karen's face twisted with disbelief and frustration. But just as I thought the ordeal was over, one of the officers turned to me and said, "There's one more thing we need to clarify." They revealed that during their investigation, they'd uncovered reports of unauthorized timber removal in the area, linked to someone else, someone who wasn't me. Suddenly, the conflict shifted. It wasn't about me after all, but about a larger problem the HOA had been ignoring: illegal logging that affected everyone in the community. The HOA Karen's aggressive behavior now looked like an attempt to cover up her own involvement or protect someone else. It was a shocking twist that none of us saw coming. In that moment, the neighbors' murmurs grew louder, eyes darting between her and the surrounding forest. The officers warned that the investigation would continue, and the community would have to come together to solve a much bigger problem. As they packed up and left, I looked around, realizing this wasn't just about firewood or property lines anymore. It was about trust, accountability, and fighting for what's right in a place we all call home. And just like that, the quiet lake cabin became the starting point of a story no one expected, one that was far from finished. After the police left, the neighborhood slowly began to settle, but the impact of that day lingered in the air. The firewood dispute, which had started as a simple misunderstanding, opened up a much bigger conversation about trust and transparency within our community. The HOA Karen's aggressive actions had been exposed, and many neighbors started questioning the leadership and hidden agendas that had been brewing beneath the surface. I took the time to talk with several neighbors in the days that followed. Many shared their own stories of conflicts with the HOA, while others expressed relief that someone had finally stood up to the overreach. We realized that while the community rules were meant to protect all of us, they couldn't work if they were used as tools for control or intimidation. As for the illegal timber removal the police mentioned, sparked a joint effort among residents to keep a closer eye on the woods and report suspicious activity. We wanted to protect the natural beauty of our lake cabin area and make sure everyone's property rights were respected. It felt like a turning point, bringing neighbors together instead of driving us apart. Looking back, I learned that standing up for what's right, isn't always easy, especially when faced with someone as determined as the HOA Karen. But it also reminded me how important it is to know your rights and to have evidence when disputes arise. Sometimes conflicts reveal deeper issues that need to be addressed for the good of the whole community. My lake cabin remains my sanctuary, but now it also symbolizes resilience and community strength. This experience showed me that even in peaceful places, challenges can arise, and when they do, it's how we respond that really matters. Thanks for following along with this story. If you've ever dealt with HOA drama or property disputes, I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments.